compound interest, good thing. Compounding bad calorie after bad calorie, not such a good thing,
Oh yeah.
and I grew outward, not upward. And by age 14, I remember going in because I had some health issues into my early teen and mid-teen years. I started to really have asthma affect me almost all the time, and the doctor pulling my mom out of the office and like, hey, Betty Ann, your son died. Yeah, he's morbidly obese. Me not understanding what morbidly nor obese meant at that time didn't sound good. And then once I understood what that meant, I was like, okay, well, you're just giving me a label for what I've already emotionally and psychologically realized I had an issue. And that was the thing that really opened my eyes. Like, this whole nutrition thing is so damn confusing. No wonder the rest of the world's so freaking confused. Like, you look at back in Time magazine back in the 80s, they had a cover that said, well, basically it vilified butter.
Yes.
And eggs. It talked about fats are bad, right? And it vilified it. Right. And this is the mainstream. You come up into the early, 2010, 2011, Time does another cover, butter's on the cover, and they talk about the health benefits of eating lots of butter. And it was like, dude, within 30 years, one lifetime, you've got two contradictory covers on a very well-respected media outlet.
Welcome to the Live Damn Well podcast. My name is Jorge Roman, and my guest today is Dai Manuel, author, distinguished Toastmaster, and keynote speaker, and executive performance coach. Dai, thank you very much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you, Jorge. Again, do I say it right? Like, I got to ask,
absolutely.
The way you say it sounds a lot different than when I say it.
Well, one can only hope that people pronounce it like I do. That's too idealistic what I found. Ever since I was in elementary school, it would be George pretty much. And that would be the best thing I could hope for, the best way of butchering it. So honestly, the fact that you said it that way is already up here. So
all right. Well, that's I'm glad to hear that. So I'll try to keep doing it the right way. My grandfather's name was George. Okay. Obviously he spelt it the traditional way of George. And, but so when I saw your spelling, I when I started looking around your platform, I was like, oh yeah, it's Jorge. So yes. I got it. But I am Canadian and my accent comes through at times. And you know what I'm talking about.
Still better than the American accent I found though.
Yeah, it depends, right? I've got some clients in Texas, and one of which thick accent. I'm like, holy, it's just awesome, right? When you think about it, it's like you can get on a plane, I can be there in like 5 hours, and yet the dialect is so different, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Just goes to show you, we might be very much alike, but there are so many differences too. Anyways, yes. I'm honored to be here. Thank you for the opportunity.
Of course. Thank you for coming on. As I said, like it was a cool conversation that you had with Mitch's podcast, and I was actually looking into a few other interviews that you did back in like 2011 on YouTube, and so I actually saw something that you didn't mention in the other interviews, which was how you got into fitness with childhood obesity and wanting to get fit. And that was something I resonated with because, when I was 4 through probably like 12 years old, I was that overweight, really chubby kid that also faced the same, like very similar, problems with classmates just picking on me and stuff like that. And I wanted to get your thoughts on all of that, on that journey.
Well, I've been someone like yourself. You've been around wellness for a long time, or at least more on the athletic side, right? Like with your swimming career, especially. Like you realize that food is very much a fuel source, and it is our like primary fuel source. But it makes a big difference, right? The types of quality of food versus maybe convenient type food. It makes a big impact in our performance, and I didn't have that awareness as a kid. And to be fair, when I think back to it, from the age of 9 to 14, my lifestyle was not conducive for healthy and active. Okay. I was very much the opposite. And as much as someone that's found a career in the wellness space, I didn't come to it naturally. I came from the opposite end of the spectrum, which is actually more common than I believe, because I look even, when we talked before we hit record here, you were sharing that, just what you experienced through swimming, recognizing that there's got to be a better way. There's got to be a way to really tap in and figure out how to do things so our energy is more like consistent, right?
Right.
Versus this sort of roller coaster I think a lot of us are accustomed to. You wake up in the morning and you feel like, man, says I was in bed for 7 hours, but I sure don't feel like I slept 7 hours.
Yeah. Yeah.
And mid-afternoon, if you're Canadian and you're not heading for a double at Tim Hortons with donut, you're a weirdo, because that is like the norm, right? You go and you grab a coffee, you get something sugary in the mid-afternoon for a pick-me-up.
Yes.
And so we have these norms, I say, and my family was definitely fell into the norms. And so a lot of those behaviors were modeled to me very early on. Like we didn't really talk about nutrition or the types of foods we ate. Where today, especially bringing up my own kids who are now into their teen years, those are regular conversations we've had ever since they could comprehend. And even before then, we would tell them, so things have shifted. And I have to, so when I take it back to sort of where I started from, I want that context to be represented because the world is different now. We have more access to information. I mean, I'm older than Google, right? So as I tell my kids, I'm like, yeah, I went to the library to learn all this stuff. And they're like, whoa, Dad, you Google it? I'm like, no, I'm older than Google. I had to do it the old school way. But growing up, in my early teens in the 80s, it was just an interesting time. My parents were one of only one other set of parents in my class, with another kid in my class, had parents that were separating or had already divorced. So, today it's a lot more normal, like over 50% of relationships end in separation and divorce, which is, I mean, that's pretty startling when you think about it. Back then, though, in the early to mid 80s, it wasn't a norm. And, like I said, it was one of the kids. So emotionally, I felt a lot of stress, a little bit of anxiety. My world as I knew it was rocked. And it was a very traumatic experience at age 9 to hear this from my parents. And then to have to adapt and adjust to this two household concept. And really, we'd see my dad every other weekend, and we'd see my mom was raising my brother and I full time. Meanwhile, working full time, as well as going back to school full time to level up her education and get her master's. So you can imagine it left my brother and I by ourselves a lot. Well, I learned very quickly, that if I eat certain types of foods and I do certain types of activities, I can feel good in the moment. Those quick little hits, those instant gratification moments. So I learned that if I ate foods that were fairly, let's just say, low in nutritional value, high in calories, I would get this little emotional lift. I'd feel better in the moment while I was eating. And, whether it be ice cream or baked goods or, pizza, it's like just really refined foods at that time, a lot of which came out of the box because of convenience. Recognize my mom was busy. She'd buy us foods. My brother and I would be left to fend for ourselves at times, especially during the week, not on weekends, but during the week. And so we would have a lot of these foods that we could heat up in the microwave or out of the box straight into the oven, right? And that on top of video games and movies. Those were, again, dopamine hits, ways of sort of distracting myself, keeping myself busy in the moment, and just really tuning out the rest of the world. And it doesn't sound so bad to do that every once in a while, because believe me, I'm just as much as the next person, Netflix and chill nights, hey, I'm all for it, man. But when it happens day in, day out for a period of 5 years, I think we all know enough that, compound interest, good thing. Compounding bad calorie after bad calorie, not such a good thing. you know
Oh yeah.
and I grew outward, not upward. And by age 14, I remember going in because I had some health issues. My asthma got really, really bad. I had asthma from a young child. As a younger kid, it was diagnosed, but it was usually due to animal dander. So if I got around animals, I would have asthmatic issues. But now, into my early teen and mid-teen years, I started to really have asthma affect me almost all the time, which was affected based on my weight gain, and the doctor pulling my mom out of the office and like, hey, Betty Ann, your son died. Yeah, he's morbidly obese. Me not understanding what morbidly nor obese meant at that time. Didn't sound good.
Mm.
And then once I understood what that meant, I was like, okay, well, you're just giving me a label for what I've already emotionally and psychologically realized I had an issue. Because, going to school, I would forge my mom's signature so I wouldn't have to do phys ed class, because getting changed in front of my peers, no way. No, thank you very, very much. Nope. Also, in the summertime, any like parties, pool parties, get-togethers. No, I'm not available, or I'm sick, or whatever. I just got really good at just withdrawing from everybody and being on my own. Because when you're feeling depressed, you're feeling sad, feeling very self-conscious and self-aware, uh, these are tendencies. They're very real tendencies. I was hurting. I was hurting a lot, and so I found it easier just hurt on my own. Don't express my emotions. Don't share what's going on. Just deal with it, because this is mine to deal with. And that's what I believed. And then at age 14, I hit what I feel was my bottom in that limited scope of life. Because people are like, wow, you were only 14 and you felt like you hit rock bottom. Well, yeah, I kind of did, based on my limited scope in life up to that point. Half of my time span was spent in this state of unhealth, and yeah, it was tough, because I don't remember what it was like to be healthy, to be happy. My
Right.
norm was now feeling the way I was. And when you're in that place and you feel that's your normal, like that's just the way things are, it can feel pretty scary, and so obviously thoughts of maybe it'd be easier if I wasn't here started to
Yes.
enter my mind. And
Yep.
it never really occurred to me before. I mean, obviously there's those moments you might entertain, gosh, it'd just be easier if I didn't have to deal with this, right? And but then I really started to think on that. It's like, well, what would it be like?
Right.
Maybe that would be the easier way. Because admittedly, it took me 5 years to get to this point, and I don't see the next 5 years being any better if I keep living life this way. Maybe it's easier just to end it. That wasn't really an option, because I started thinking about my parents. I started thinking
Mhm.
about my brother. I started thinking about the fact that I actually wanted to live. I just didn't want to live unhappy. And so here I found myself a bit of a conundrum. And because I was like, okay, well, here I am, morbidly obese. I hate myself. I don't even like looking at my reflection nor seeing myself in any images. Like, I'd even watch how I'd walk down the street, because if there was too many windows, I'd be worried about taking a look and having to see my reflection in the window, shop windows, like it was that. And it's weird, right? Like, in thinking back on it, it's amazing how I could compromise my own life in order to avoid being reminded of that state of health or unhealth that I was in. And
Because
those that
it
are
brought
listening,
you a
watching
lot of
this,
pain.
yeah, and
Yeah.
and and I think many people can relate to this, because I think we've all been there, or maybe we are there right now, and it feels really lonely when you're there. Really lonely. As much as my parents loved me and wanted to support me, every time they offered to help, I would take it as a personal attack. I would act out. They would come and say, "Hey, we'd love to get you a gym membership," or "How about going to try this sport?" Or
Mhm.
maybe we go to the hospital. We meet with that nice nutritionist, right?
Mhm.
And me at that age, I'm like, "You're just telling me I'm fat. You're telling me I need to change. You're telling me you don't like me how I am." That's all I heard, right?
Right.
Like, I didn't think anything other than when they came to me with those kind of suggestions. So, here was this one day at my dad's place, and I'm coming out of the shower, and the mirror, which normally, because I had a great hack, or I would stay in the shower extra long, make sure it was extra hot. So when I would come out, the mirror would be covered in condensation, like get all fogged up. So I wouldn't have to look at myself while I was toweling off. Yet this one Saturday morning, while I'm at my dad's place and he's rushing my brother and I to get out to some appointment, I don't even recall what it is. I mean, we could have been going bowling. I don't know. But he's like knocking on the door. He's like, "Come on, Dad, hurry up. We got to go. It's got to be a fast one today. Go." And so I respected that. Had a fast shower, but because I got out of the shower so quick, I'm toweling off and I can see my profile in the mirror. And for some reason, I decided to turn, and I locked eyes. And I hadn't done that for a while up to this point. And I freaking hated that guy looking back at me. Like, I didn't even know who it was. I was disgusted. I was like, I can't even believe that's me. I hate you. I hate this. And I remember grabbing my stomach and just like jiggling it, and just like all of a sudden just released uncontrollable sobbing. There's no pretty crying here. It was all ugly cry. It was like just full on. And here I'm trying to towel off, and I'm getting just as wet from my tears. And I just have this thought that I can't do this anymore. What if I embrace this fear I have for the unknown? Because that was really what I had. It was either I keep living the life I'm living, doing the things I'm doing, but I have to be honest with myself, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years from now, it's never going to be better than it is right now. And that's not something to look forward to. Meanwhile, alternatively, I could just try to do something different to produce different results. But I have no idea how to do that. I don't know what I'm going to do. Don't know when to do it. Like I would just a lot of unknowns because I was afraid that I just didn't know. Afraid of failure, like all sorts of fears, right? We all deal with this all the time. Those little voices in our head are really damn noisy at times, and they were deafening that day. And yet, I was like, you know what? I'm going to be healthy. I'm going to be happy. I left that bathroom. I got dressed. I came out to the living room, saw my dad, and I was like, Dad, I want to get healthy. I want to be fitter. I don't want to be like this anymore. And as the saying goes, strike the iron when it's hot. My dad must have seen something in me at that moment because he was like, we're going to act on this right away. Like there's clearly some motivation here. Let's not let this fizzle.
Let's
And
go.
so we went out and bought a mountain bike because I wasn't going to work out in a gym. I wasn't going to go to a community center. There's no way I was going to do anything around people because I was so self-conscious. And so I wanted an activity I could do on my own. And obviously something that was workable into my lifestyle at that point. And so biking, I remember I always loved biking as a kid. And so buying a mountain bike, and I just started to ride every day. Like just go out and go for a ride. I lived in a fairly rural part of the province. I lived just outside Toronto, so a smaller town. And so it wouldn't take long to get to the outskirts. And it was just all farmland, orchards and little hills and stuff. And so I embraced this idea of just moving my body. Went to the library, got books on nutrition, and there wasn't a lot of options other than like more medical type books, right? Like books written for nutritionists and dietitians. And there was a couple that I found though, like The Zone Diet by Dr. Barry Sears, and I really liked that. Also, there were some works by, trying to remember some of the other ones. I think it was Optimum Nutrition was another one I found. Either way, there was a limited amount, right? And but I started to just educate myself on the basics, just the building blocks of nutrition, macronutrients, what happens in our body from a foundational level when we eat foods, because I understood that, and as I educated myself on how to read a label and observe what types of foods I was getting, especially because at that point I was eating a lot of boxed foods, it was a big shift for me, a big shift. But I was consistent. Every day I get out for a ride. I changed how I fed myself. And crazy enough, after about 20 months of repeating that fairly regularly, fairly consistently, I realized a new lifestyle. I changed. I lost that weight. I also kickstarted puberty a little bit more, which is a nice thing, as a prepubescent male, and my a lot of things had been slowed based on my state of obesity. And as soon as I started losing the weight, doing some resistance training, changing how I fed myself, amazing. Like just the body all of a sudden started to catch up, started producing a bit more testosterone, which also helped my cause. Right. And
Right.
so there was all these little factors that sort of played into me realizing that weight release over the next 20 months. And then I just got to a point where it was just the way I live my life. And haven't really changed ever since. I've obviously had periods in my life where things have fallen off, and I think we all have those moments. Like you look at the year we just had. I mean, a lot of people have experienced that, right? It's like it's just life is dynamic and it's always changing. So we're always doing our best with where we find ourselves in the moment. But I'm very grateful that that big obstacle that I ran up against, at such an early age, taught me that change was possible.
Right.
That
That's
change,
that's something that
it's the biggest
is
one.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And it's something that I'm so passionate about, and it's something that I've talked to a lot of the people that I've interviewed on the podcast, because really all of these lobbying groups with processed grains and things like
Mm.
that are kind of alien to us in terms of the amount of time that we've been here on Earth, and it's really kind of a crime what's being done to children because, as you said, the development is being delayed. And that's a crucial piece of development where if they're not getting the right nutrients, where if they're overeating on crappy foods that are nutrient
Yeah.
depleted, they're being set up for a life which is more likely to be depressed, more likely to have anxiety, more likely to have type 2 diabetes, obesity, and all of these things, right?
Yes. Yes. So well said. And you're spot on, right? Like even as good as the governing bodies responsible for some of the guidelines as it relates to diet, nutrition, right? Like uh, when you really start looking at the lobbyists and some of the history there, I mean, it doesn't take someone to be very well versed in this to realize there's some connections. There's some influence there. There's some bias.
Yeah.
And without getting into details, there's a lot of documentaries that cover this way better than I can. And I'm sure in some of your past conversations, interviews, and your own research, or you can speak to this much more eloquently than I can. But what I'll tell you is that, our DNA, us as a species, we're extremely resilient. We are. I mean, the human species, look at us. We've covered this planet. Now, climate change experts will say that we're overly resilient at times, but regardless, here we are. And we adapt very, very quickly, and yet the way we've eaten for most of the time we've been human beings, right? Homo sapiens, it really hasn't changed much, with the
Right.
exception, especially since the Industrial Revolution, there's been a lot of advancements, especially with science as it relates to how we engineer foods now. So we have to start wondering, like all these rapid changes we've experienced in the last century, let alone the last 50 years, is there going to be a negative impact long term? And I don't think it has to be long term. We're seeing the impact. Like I look at childhood obesity. Like back in the early 80s, you wouldn't find those two words in the same sentence typically.
Mm-hmm.
It just
Mm-hmm.
wasn't a normal thing. We're now trying to find childhood and obesity not in a sentence together. It's much more challenging because it's a very real concern now. So why? Why is that? Right. And so I like to think that there's lots of clues being left. It's just whether we're tuning in and picking them up. Right.
Right, and a big part of it too is the change in agricultural practices. So let's say early
Mm.
1900s, we had a very large percentage of Americans who were farmers themselves. They literally ate off of what they made. And now we have a tiny percentage of people who are making their own food and eating it as
Yeah,
fresh as possible, not sitting in a shelf for a few months before they eat it. That's a big change, dietary pattern change right there.
absolutely. And also, I mean, just when you start looking at GMO, right? Like, I mean, we still don't really understand the repercussions of that,
Right.
if any. Like, I'm not here to say, oh, there won't be any repercussions, or there will be. I mean, I just don't think there's enough known yet.
Right.
On the long term side of things. Like even I have an autoimmune disease, and so I'm hyper aware of how food can impact or ultimately certain types of foods with a certain type of lifestyle. So if I'm not paying attention to some of my daily self-care practices, right?
Hmm.
Like just basic ones, like a little bit of meditation, so stress management, right? Also some good mental health, flossing, right? Like just trying to like floss my teeth. I try to do things to make sure my mental health is in a very good space, as best I can. And then watching what I eat, like little basics, but it leaves us wondering, like everything that we know about food is based on what? I mean, what I mean by this is like, how much nutrition education did you get in school, grade school?
Oh yeah. I mean, even doctors that I've interviewed, they've told me they get 2 to 5 hours of training their whole career of medicine.
Yet it's the one thing that we pretty much have to do every day, and it baffles me at times. It just does. It just like, what if we place the emphasis on living the best life and we looked at daily movement, we looked at nutrition, we looked at mental health, like we prioritize some of those aspects, what would the world look like? I'm just curious, like what would it look like? Like, because really, I mean, that's what we need to thrive, right? Like, I
Right.
mean, sure, there's lots of other things. I mean, there's a lot of make work projects. Like I look at the internet and I think it's a fabulous tool, but it's a lot of make work, right? Like I look at all the digital landscape of work today, like just the way
Mhm.
we work. I look at the
Yeah.
way I work and I'm like, holy smokes, I work on my
Yeah.
computer.
Yep.
I coach people all over the world. I'm even doing keynotes now, but all virtually, or before it used to be in person at conferences, at events. It's just like wild. Like, but we can adapt, we can change. So that leaves me with a lot of optimism.
Right.
Like I look at it, the world's adapted, the way we work's adapted. well, why can't we adapt more around nutrition? Damn it.
Well,
It's like,
two reasons come to mind. Two big reasons.
yeah,
I mean, one
what are they? What
that
are
have
they?
been I've underestimated, and I've talked a lot about this with my friends and
Mm,
my family, is the convenience factor is
mm,
huge. People want to eat crappy food. They don't care. Like a lot of people that I've talked to simply like they know that it's bad for them, but convenience is
right.
such a big part of it. I mean, that is understated, I think.
Yes.
Another part of it is the pharmaceutical model is completely based off of just treating symptoms and
Yeah.
not, I mean, like you said, practitioners aren't trained in lifestyle based interventions. They're trained on, okay, someone is sick now. Now, at the point where they're sick and they've accumulated all this compound interest of shitty habits, now is when we'll give them a pill, which won't do anything for their overall health. It'll just treat symptoms. Today, I want to interrupt this show to talk about Hue Kitchen. Especially if you're fumbling to find a gift for this upcoming Valentine's Day, you should probably listen up too. Now, after being disappointed by some of the styrofoam tasting health foods on the market, co-founders Jordan Brown, Jason Karp, and Jessica Karp founded Hue Kitchen with a focus on getting back to human. Now, I have tried pretty much everything they have to offer, and I can't recommend them highly enough. I mean, they offer fully organic, grain-free, paleo foods like delicious crackers with a hint of rosemary, dark chocolate lightly sweetened with organic coconut sugar and filled with almond butter, organic raspberries, hazelnut butter, or even cashew butter. So they're great to give as health conscious gifts for friends or family. And if you don't have a significant other, just get them for yourself. No judgment there. Now, here's what Hue Kitchen has to offer. For Valentine's Day, Hue Kitchen has these awesome gift boxes and baking packs that they're offering. And in addition, for a limited time only, every single order will include 4 unique Valentine's Day note cards. And since you're a loyal podcast listener, you can get 10% off site-wide using code JORGE, JORGE. The link is in the description. Now, back to the show.
Yeah. And it's funny because I used to always hear about that until I was diagnosed with, I have autoimmune neutropenia, and it's basically, I've got really, really healthy bone marrow, and
Mm,
bone marrow, is largely responsible with our immunity in our bodies, and especially how our blood cells are produced, and specifically white blood cells, in my case, neutrophils, get cranked out, plenty of them, lots and lots of them. But my body has a tendency to kill them off faster than I can produce them, which puts me in a very, very low uh, level of amount of neutrophils. So, which, if you are fighting a virus or staving off virus, you need neutrophils. You get a cut or a scrape, it's neutrophils that come to the rescue to neutralize a lot of the bacteria and viral types of infections that come on. So you can imagine my hematologist like, Dai, you should probably just live in a bubble during this pandemic and not go out. I'm like, forget that,
right.
and yet a lot of the people with my condition, autoimmune neutropenia. Like, I am in an extreme situation. Just to put this in the context, like I have almost zero neutrophils. Like when I go in for my weekly blood test, just to sort of see where my levels are at, I often will get calls from new people that don't know my file, be like, "My goodness, are you okay? Do you have a fever? We need to get you to the emerge." Like that's like instant. They've got this textbook response when they see someone with my kind of numbers.
Right.
Yet they don't know my case, and why I'm bringing this up is uh, I've been in groups on Facebook, and you know how you end up meeting communities of people with similar conditions, and there's a lot of complaining, a lot of people bagging on their condition. And listen, I'm not here to put them down, I'm not judging, but I do recognize that me being in an extreme case, and yet I'm able to stave off majority of the symptoms based on the lifestyle choices that I'm making every day. And I see this is not just unique to me. I'm looking at other people that have autoimmune challenges, and I call them more of a challenges because I hate referring to it as a disease. Like it's, even though it follows that in a textbook, but they're just simply a challenge, and there's ways to overcome it. And we know through food and daily movement and certain other lifestyle factors can be influenced based on what we do every day. And And so I love this and I like talking about it because I'm like, it's what's possible if we just start looking at our little small minor changes that we make and just what we do every day, and eating is one of the most fundamental things that we all do. Like it's just, we don't even think about it. So you're right. The convenience piece is crazy, right? It's just like now, 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 now. Like, hey man, I love Prime. Okay. I like the convenience. I order that. I get it today. Awesome. Unfortunately, when it comes to nutrition, I like that kind of convenience, but the options available just aren't necessarily the healthiest for us.
Right.
And
And what you touched on, with the fact that all these habits that we do, and like a blood test is not the be all end all. Like you said, like they can't know what you look like. They can't know that you're physically active and fit and that you're mentally healthy by just looking at that. And that's something that I wrote about in my book, Return to Human. I really focused on an immune centric approach really to life. And the fact is, from the moment that we wake up to the moment we go to bed, we have all of these habits that are compounding and really destroying our immune system's ability to work as it should.
spot on, spot on. And look at inflammation, right?
Yeah.
Like that's one thing a number of years ago, I was fortunate enough that I was approached by a couple of functional medicine practitioners, and they have a summit called the Superhuman Summit. You would totally dig this, Jorge. Like
Saw you
I know
speaking at that, I think. Yeah.
it would. Yeah, I ended up. I was their MC the first year, and then I did the opening talk the following year, and so I felt very honored. And then the third year, unfortunately, I wasn't around. I was traveling, but I just a great event, the TED format. But it has a lot of people there that are, I say fringe, but they're not really fringe. Like they're accepted, they're seen as experts, but the kind of research they're doing and the kind of things they're speaking to are rather cutting edge, like especially when you start going into like the biohack space, right? Like
Yes.
there's a lot of fringe stuff out there.
Yes.
Some of it's cool. Some of it's like, well, I don't know. Like, I don't know if I see that being readily adopted by everybody.
Right.
That being said, I was fortunate enough to meet them. And one of the biggest things that they really turned me on to was even just a basic test, which everyone has to pay for. It's not one that's covered by any medical plans, but even just looking at your omega profiles, right? Like looking at your inflammation markers in your body. Like you can go and actually get tested on this. And what I found was, and this is a big eye opener. I want to bring this up because here I was before this. I was only a couple years into this, having this diagnosis. I thought I was managing it quite well with lifestyle choices, doing the testing, and there was a biologic I have to take, an injection as needed, something that they typically give to like leukemia patients. So it's a very aggressive biologic. I don't. Again, I'm the kind of guy, if I don't need to take a medication, I won't. But based on my situation and where I'm at, I recognize this is my best option to try to help me create a little bit of a lift in my neutrophils, right? But it's not going to fix any issues. It's just kind of masking some of them. But here I'm working with these guys, and they just decided that I was like, well, let's take a look at everything. Let's do a full scan. Let's look at your DNA. We'll get that done. We'll do your full blood workup. We'll look at all your inflammation markers. We'll look at your vitamin D3. Like just, it was awesome. And almost a full hormone profile. Like this is the first time I'd ever done like one of these full on in-depth, series of tests. And what came back, and this is okay. Sorry, where I was going with this is, all right, like I was eating paleo and more zone paleo. Like that was what I found was best for me, and it worked really, really well. And for those that aren't familiar with paleo and the paleo diet, it's basically no dairy. It's all no processed foods either. It's typically all just vegetables, lean proteins, nuts, maybe some healthy fats in there as well. That's predominantly it. Like you're cutting out all the breads and the grains, a lot of the legumes, and dairy, and it worked really well for me. However, my primary source of lean protein was chicken. And when I say primary, it was like easily 4 or 5 times a week I was eating chicken, thinking, well, this is healthy. This is good. This is what everybody talks about, and here's me with a good nutrition understanding, awareness. I'm not a dietitian in nutrition or anything along those lines, but I know enough over the years of what's worked, what hasn't. And I'd always had, when I eat chicken, I always thought, oh, I was making a good choice, when they tested my omegas, dude, my omega 6s were through the roof. And for those that aren't aware, omega 6 is like all your omegas are important, but it's all about the ratio. And ideally, you want lots of omega 3s, less on the omega 6s. But because I was eating so much chicken,
Mm-hmm.
which that protein, a lot of its calories and sources, it's from grains, right? It's just
Right.
the way they're birds, man. They eat like birds. Like, what do you expect? You know? And so here my omega 6s are through the roof. And I wasn't aware of that. And so when I looked at my inflammation systemically, like through my whole body, I was in a really heightened state of inflammation. And here I thought everything was right. So we went on this really strict protocol where I was taking a ton of omega 3s every day, started eating a lot more fish and red meats,
Mm-hmm.
way less. And in fact, for 3 months, I cut out all poultry, all of it, just got rid of it. And after 3 months, we retested, poof, everything was in the go zone. So it only took 3 months to correct it.
Mm-hmm.
But I have no idea how long that habit had stayed where I was in the heightened state. I was actually doing myself a lot more harm, but thinking I was doing everything right. And that was the thing that really opened my eyes. Like, this whole nutrition thing is so damn confusing. No wonder the rest of the world's so freaking confused, you know? Like,
Yeah.
there's so much contradictory information. Like, you look at back in Time magazine back in the 80s, they had a cover that said, well, basically it vilified butter, you know,
Yes.
and eggs. It talked about fats are bad, right?
Right.
Like, and it vilified it. And
Right.
this is the mainstream. You come up into the early, 2010, 2011, Time does another cover, talks about, and butter's on the cover, sorry. And they talk about the health benefits of eating lots of
Right.
butter. And it was like,
Yes.
dude, within 30 years, one lifetime, you've got two contradictory covers on a very well-respected media outlet.
Yes. Yeah.
Who are we supposed to believe?
Right.
Like, and so it baffles me, right? It does baffle me, but I feel so empathetic to just the world and our confusion around how to eat. Like, it's so damn confusing. And I think it's because, as you said earlier, we're all looking for the magic bullet or the pill. We are used to the pharmaceutical approach, right? It's like, oh, it's okay. There's a pill for that. Like, if people are given the option, hey, there's a pill that will get you to your ideal body weight, and here's a pill that's a placebo. Like, which one would you rather have? Like, if people are given the choice, of course, they're always going to take the one that's going to help them be healthy and fit instantly.
Right. Right.
It just doesn't exist, guys.
Right. And
so,
there's this quote by someone I follow, Joel Green, also in the nutrition and fitness space, and he said, "Science is in the business of being wrong when they think they're right.
oh, I
The
love
Earth
that.
was flat. Hundreds of years to dispel that, and we still got a few flat earthers.
Oh, dude, there's more and more.
Butter, saturated fat. We're seeing it's not really the saturated fat or cholesterol. It's the inflammation that goes along with something like omega 6s or highly
Yeah.
refined foods. So it's you have to take. People think that science is immaculate. It's not flawed at all. It's
Yeah.
science, right? You must
Yeah.
trust the science, and that's a narrative that I've been seeing a lot
Mhm.
over this pandemic, and it's really sad to see that, because science is not a dogma. Shouldn't be ideology. Science should be observations about something, and it shouldn't ever be like a religion. And I don't mean to offend people who are
Mhm.
religious, but it shouldn't be like something that is, oh, that's settled science, we can't talk about it anymore. It's like, no, science is always changing. This saturated fat thing proved that.
Yes. Yes. And
Yeah.
and we are quick to vilify certain food groups or ways of eating so quickly, and it can be in favor one day and then out of favor the next. I often equate it to sort of the medieval approach to royalty, right? Like, if the queen was out of favor, forget about it. You're in trouble.
Mhm.
You're losing your head, like, it's not so drastic now, but opinions and attitudes change so quickly. But because of social media, there's a lot of this vilification, like this
Mhm.
labeling of good versus bad. And I think the problem is, and I don't like morality to come into nutrition conversations, because I feel that that's where we can go down the dogmatic path, and
Mhm.
it's really one opinion over another. And
Mhm.
at the end of the day, as I even wrote in my book, a long time ago, like, listen, when I want a piece of cheesecake, I know dairy's not good for me, right? I could go with a vegan alternative, sure. It's not always accessible, but if I want a piece of cheesecake because I'm having a special meal with a friend or my family, I'm gonna have the damn cheesecake. All right. I'm having it. I'm not going to be feeling any guilt over it. I'm actively and aware of my choice. And I'm choosing to have this right now. And I'm going to enjoy it. But if I listen to some people out there, and if I was going to let that opinion impact me and influence
Mhm.
me, there's people out there, this is good. This is bad. This cheesecake, this is bad for you. And it's
Baby
like,
talk.
oh my
Yeah.
gosh, man, it is, right? And
Yeah.
and as soon as we do that, now I eat it, and in the back of my mind, I'm thinking subconsciously, I've just done something bad.
Hmm.
I've got guilt, shame, blame. Because this is how I felt back in my early teens, when I was gaining all this weight and just didn't know. I didn't understand that all these choices I was making or lack thereof was
Hmm.
having such a stark impact,
Yeah.
and so I really feel for people. And I think we're seeing a tipping point right now, just I look at just the quality of the documentaries and access to information today versus any other time. And it's amazing, we've got podcasts like your own that are really speaking into this right now. And so it's just a matter of hitting that critical mass. And then I think we'll see a big shift, but it's got to happen in the developing countries first.
Yes.
Like I find that most of the countries, or sorry, the developed countries, versus the ones that are still developing. Like I lived in Bali for 2.5 years, and I'll tell you, they're healthy. But where they're not healthy is because of the influence of, AKA first world countries, influence with just junk. Like the amount of junk in Bali. Like if you go to some of the restaurants, it's all fresh made, fresh grown, like awesome. Like you
Yeah.
have some fish. They like literally the dude's there cooking it on the grill and he caught it this morning. And it's like, sweet, this is good. I like this. But then you see all the convenience that's now started to influence it, all the fast food chains and their influence. And, everyone's so enamored with this North American culture, and the way we eat, and they want that. And it's like, but you see it, like, it's amazing. Traditionally fairly slender people, right? But
Right.
the amount of obesity now in their population and type 2 diabetes, it's like through the roof, like pandemic proportions. Yet
Yes.
we don't hear about that in the media. Not really. It'll be a story that will make the front page for a day, and then by tomorrow it's gone. And that's really unfortunate. It really is
Yeah,
unfortunate.
it is. It is. It's painfully funny that these developed nations, like you said, and even there are some modern hunter-gatherer populations like the Hadza in northern Tanzania, for example,
Yeah.
are super well studied, and they're rivaling industrialized nation in infectious diseases, which is something that we think we're above. We think, oh, we've got that covered. It's like, no, these people are so healthy, much healthier than we are. Like, how is that possible?
Yeah. Crazy.
Yeah.
It's wild, man. It's wild. And something that I like to remind myself, and I don't know, people can take what they want of this, but I'll often say to people, it's like, it's a matter of leaning into the space of like, what am I not going to regret doing?
Hmm.
Right? What am I not going to regret? Like, I never have a client, and I usually challenge my clients. I want you to have one big healthy salad a day, like just one. And for most people, that's adding in a lot of veggies, right? A lot of
Hmm.
fresh foods. Like to them, that's one big change that they can commit to. Okay, I'm going to have one good healthy salad every day. Great,
Hmm.
it's a good starting point. And I'm like, yeah, I'm putting maybe some cedar plank salmon on there, some lean protein. I mean, whatever, some tofu, like whatever. Just make it a beautiful meal that you're proud of. I've never had someone text me later on that day and say, Di, I really regret having that salad for lunch. I don't ever get those messages.
Hmm.
I never get a message from a client or a friend that just had a workout saying, I really regret doing that workout. I regret working out today. I don't ever hear that. They might
Right.
regret doing burpees or something like that, but I don't hear any, like there's no regret around the actual act of self-care, about that idea of showing ourselves a little bit of love and doing something that's good for us. We don't regret that. That's time well spent, and we know it instinctively, consciously and subconsciously. The body loves it. And so come from that space, like what am I going to not regret doing?
Hmm.
And maybe do a little bit more of that,
Oh
just,
yeah,
you
negative
know,
motivation is almost
yeah,
like just as powerful as positive motivation.
yeah. But
Like,
it's
what am
it's
I
more
moving
than that.
away
It's actually
from?
being fully aware that I know if I do these things, I'm never going to regret it. I'm
Right.
actually going to feel the opposite. I'm going to feel proud of myself for accomplishing something that's good for me.
Hmm.
So it's not this fear-based aspect of like, yeah, the negative reinforcement or negative motivation. I'm not not a big proponent for that because I mean, I came from that my old school personal training days in my 20s. I didn't know any better. No pain, no
Right.
gain. You
Right.
know, like,
Right.
that was just the way I did it. And then as I approached nearer and nearer my 40s, especially, I started to realize, man, things change. They
Mm-hmm.
change a lot. And the way I train changes, the way I think, the way I observe the world, the way I interact with people. I mean, I had changed. I'm a different person now than I was 20 years ago. And I've learned a lot more along the way, you know? And so I think it's all of us trying to embrace that idea that we're always going to be changing. That's okay. Not so bad. But am I at least achieving some of the results that I want to achieve? You know, like, is my health going to support me in going after the things I want in my life?
Mm-hmm.
Or is it going to detract me? Is it going to hold me back? If it's holding you back, that's a really hard place to be. Believe me, as someone that's been there a few times, I get it. Totally understand. And it's hard. But the neat thing is, we don't have to do it on our own. We don't have to be alone in this process. There's lots of cool support groups out there, networks, communities. And that is one of the benefits of the online space today. There's lots of places you can plug into to get the information, to get the support, to create the relationships with like-minded individuals that are just as motivated and inspired to make those lifestyle changes as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know about you, but I sure enjoy going with others. You know, as the African proverb says, you know, you want to go fast, go alone. Want to go far, go together, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm all about, let's just go together. Let's
Yeah.
have a party there on the beach when we make it. and,
I love that, man. And I
it's,
want to touch on something that you said earlier when you were feeling a little bit of that depression. And you said something which really resonated with me, which is you retract from other people. You start to put yourself in an isolated space. And oh man, that says a lot because when I was going through the same thing a few years ago, I felt the same thing. I didn't want to talk to people. And I started to ask myself why. And one of the reasons is people lift you up, and when you're in that state, it's kind of a cycle where you want to keep on being in that state, and being with other people doesn't allow for that as much.
mm,
And those are the people that lift you up when you're feeling at your worst. So I really do think, like you said, it's being with people, and not being that lone wolf, which is so I think idolized, I think is so important.
yeah, it's interesting that term. I love that you threw that out there. That lone wolf, you know, sort of metaphor analogy. It's yeah, it's. I remember at periods of my life, I often say, yeah, I'm an Army of One, you know, and I would
Mm,
almost be proud about it. And not anymore. Like I realized that was all false pride, right? Like just ego driven pride.
yes.
Like I don't need anybody. I can do this on my own. You know, like just
Yes.
that bit of bravado. You know,
Yep.
like that sort of yeah. It just it's amazing, just amazing. But as soon as I got it in my own head, you know, and realized that hey, not only am I fallible, but I need help. I need
Hmm.
support. Like I need it, but more than just need, I want it. I really want it. And as soon as I found those communities, and it takes a little while to find it, but once you find it, you know,
Hmm.
because you feel like you belong, right? It's
Yes.
not just a matter of being a member of something. It's like you actually feel like you belong there, you know, and that sense of belonging, that sense of community we feel through that shared belonging, I think it's really powerful, motivating, as well as inspiring, you know, and I think we can all cultivate a little bit more of that because we know when
Yes.
we're in that space or that feeling, that connectivity, it sure is a lot easier to go and get certain things done. At least in my experience, I found that. Like I said,
Yes.
like, geez, I could just I sort of alluded to you before we started talking today. You know, I've got a weekly men's meetup. You know, mentorship Mondays, and we meet every Monday. We've met every Monday for over 2.5 years. Every Monday, and it's this weekly the touch point, right, where we get together, no judgment, no coaching, like literally, we're just coming to share what's real for us and touch base on how the last week went, and hopefully send some intentions or some energy, you know, some focus, realizing that yeah, we may be on our own, but we're not alone. And that in itself is just like wow, well, such a the best way to describe it is like I leave that call and I feel better than I was when I first started the call. And that's the experience I want. So when you're part of a community, I find that every interaction, you end up leaving the interaction feeling better than you were when you first started. And that's when you really know you're in a great space. It's cultivating that positive sort of flow, you know, and
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, yeah.
Absolutely. Like when I was in that state where I wasn't sure I wanted to keep being here, and I kept on that those ideas kept on flowing. The only thing that pulled me out of that was, if I'm not going to do it for myself, I'm going to do it for the people around me. And that is cliche, I understand, but it's like, really, I didn't want to do it for myself. At that moment, I was like,
Yeah.
I could not be here if it was just because of me. But I have my parents. I would leave a hole in their lives. I have my friends and my girlfriend. I can't do that. So I'm going to
Mhm.
go and do this thing 100%, go the full 9 yards and live life as well as I possibly can. And that's really the biggest motivation that I found for this.
I love that. That's so good. You know, and I think it's good, man, to have that motivation for wanting to, I don't know. I think it's part of the accountability too. Like I think at times I found it accountable, like being accountable to others was much more motivating than trying to be accountable to myself.
Yes.
Just because I know I recognize my faults. You know, I recognize when my energy's not in a good space, I'm not holding myself accountable. I'm not. You know, I'm avoiding the act of being accountable, to be
Right.
honest, you know, and that's where procrastination creeps in. I put
Mm-hmm.
things off that I said were important for me and I put it off, which then in turn makes me even feel a little bit worse. You know,
Right.
that little voice starts criticizing and making a lot of noise in my mind. And it's like, oh man, what am I doing? You know, but when you're around that community, you show up, right? You plug in.
Yes.
Just the act of plugging in and showing up is enough at times for myself, and what I've noticed with others that I've observed this with, just enough to have that hard reset. You know,
Mm-hmm.
and I think every once in a while we need that reset. Just it's like, okay, reset. Let's try again. You know, and just start with the basics. And I find that every once in a while, that hard reset, I always equate it to sort of the old PC days, you know, control, alt, delete, you know, like how do you control, alt, delete your life? Control, alt, delete, you know, that hard reset where you just get that opportunity to create a little bit of space to slow down and breathe,
Mm-hmm.
take a pause, figure out what's really important, and then just do one little thing, and then add on. And I think that is, especially this time of year, you know, every time around the start of a new year, I think we all feel a bit of pressure that, oh, we got to set ourselves up for a big year. You know, this is a new year. Got to do this. Got to do it all. You know, and make all these changes. And holy smokes, I don't know about you, but that just feels like a heavy load to carry.
Definitely. And
And
that's why you can't carry it for too long.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And
Yeah.
stats will prove it. You know, I don't need to get into the math of it all, but it's very discouraging when you start looking into how many people set New Year's resolutions
Yeah.
and how many are actually still active. Even today, as we speak, as we're nearing the end of the first month of the new year, statistically, you know, over half of people that started the year with a resolution, especially one that was health or fitness based, probably aren't doing it anymore. You know,
Oh
they probably
yeah.
already given up, and
Yeah.
that's awful. I mean, awful way to start the year. I start the year feeling like I'm a failure. That sucks.
Yeah.
You know, so that's why I always joke. I'm like, hey, New Year's solutions, not resolutions. You know,
Yeah.
like let's stick with that. And um, yeah, I know we're talking about a lot of sort of bigger concepts, but I think they're all connected, you know, and the unifying connection is just ourselves, right? Like our own role in what we're talking about here. And I think sometimes it's easier to boil it down to the micro, you know, like just look, what am I doing? It's sort of that idea, right? Like be the change you want to see in the world. I mean, that made a lot of sense when that quote was shared, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
it was Gandhi, right? That when he
Yeah.
mentioned that, it was
Right.
like, well, he's talking about the individual, you know,
Yes.
like you be that change. Because if everybody is the change, we're all going to achieve the change, you know. And that's why I always say, like my wife has an ongoing thing where she'll ask our families, like, okay, if we had 24/7 camera crew around us all the time, you know, monitoring all the things that we do for the world to see, would we like who we're showing up as right now? Would we like the choices that we're portraying right now and role modeling right now? You know, and it's just enough to like shift things, be like, no, no, I wouldn't like that to be the way I just, you know, spoke to you. Definitely not. That's not making the highlight reel. Or if it is, it's making it a very negative highlight reel, right? Like,
Right.
and so there's other ways I think of sort of introducing that idea of self accountability, but maybe really down to our own individual perspective, right? Like just how do we see ourselves? And Anyways, I know we're getting off tangent here, but man, this is great. I love this kind of conversation.
Yeah, man. I love that you brought up the fact this connectedness piece, because that's something that I strive to talk about in all of my podcasts, and in my book it's a big piece of that. I mean, environmental health is human health.
Mm,
Metabolic health is brain health. Like all of these things that are so reductionistic, and we just look at this one thing. No, like relationships are also physical health. If
yeah.
they're a poor relationship, it's going to be, you're going to have a hell of a time trying to have a good physical health. And that's exactly what I wanted to ask you about next, relationships.
Mm,
So a lot of the biggest regrets that people have when they're on their deathbeds is really not staying in touch with friends, not having
mm.
those good relationships. And like you said at the beginning, 50% of marriages end in divorce. So what have you personally found to be essential in maintaining or creating relationships?
Well, first and foremost, I'm not in the business of collecting friends. And what I mean by that, and I think a lot of people get it, or I see you nodding, so I know you know what I mean here. It's like I'm not. There was a period of my life where I thought networking. I believe the idea that your net worth is in your network. I heard that quote. I believed it, and I still think there's it rings true depending on how you're looking at it. You know what
Mm-hmm.
state you're coming from. But I realized I was more interested in just amassing a large network than I was looking at creating quality connections.
Mm-hmm.
And I think bringing it back to that is it is the connection. I was craving deeper connection with people, just people in general, especially other men, because I'd always looked at men as competition. you know, I did. I'd size guys up. I'd go to a networking event. I'd go to a meetup, and right away, judgment, sizing people up. Already thinking to myself, "Ooh, who do I have to be to impress the people in this
Mm,
room?" Right? Like rather than
yeah.
just showing up and being who I am. And it was exhausting, just exhausting to work from that space. And so, as far as relationships, especially the relationship with self was the first and foremost priority for me. About 11 years ago, I'm going through a lot of big lifestyle changes, and uh, it felt like it was out of necessity, but it ultimately was because I wanted it. I wanted change again, like I experienced as a morbidly obese teen, wanting that
Mm,
change for myself to be happier, to be healthier, realizing there's got to be a better way. The same applied with just me as a human being, evolving into whatever that next version of me was going to be. But I wanted to have some influence on that, and so that was being very selective on the types of people I wanted to associate with, also looking at where was I spending a lot of my time and energy, and what was I getting in return. Because when you're in a great relationship with somebody, whether it be a romantic one or it be a professional one or just a really good friend, personal relationship, that idea of give and take, it's not really give and take. It's an ebb and flow of energy, right? We're rarely all always on the same level. So there's always going to be someone that's got a little bit higher energy, one's going to be a bit lower, and we're just trying to regulate, right, and support each other in whatever endeavors that we're focused on working on. And I started looking at some of my relationships and some of the choices that I would make and how I would show up based on beliefs attached to those relationships. Who did I believe that they expected me to be,
mhm,
right? Versus asking myself, who do I want to be? What do I want? What makes me happy? Is this actually a relationship I want to foster? Continue to invest in,
mhm,
place those deposits of myself into, with the expectation at some certain times that this is a relationship. It goes both ways. Where in certain relationships, I felt it was just going one direction, which creates an imbalance, and it started to make me feel really disconnected, and dissatisfied, and which would also lead to sometimes some other types of behaviors that weren't healthy for me. Like I used to abuse alcohol, sometimes drug use. Like
mhm,
it was just based on where I was emotionally and psychologically, and just that feeling again, like I had when I was a morbidly obese teen, right? Like I figured out other ways to numb myself in the moment, and just it shifted from food to booze,
mhm.
and so going through those changes, I started to ask myself, like, association, power of association is so critical.
Mhm.
So when you start looking at relationships, like my wife and I, we've always had a good relationship, but I can't always say it was great based on certain things, and lack of awareness for both of us, and lack of willingness on my part to adapt and evolve and change some of my belief systems. And it's not even so much change, it's just I didn't even challenge some of my beliefs to question, where did that belief come from? Like, I'm a guy, I shouldn't cry. That was one that was ingrained in me from a little kid, and also, if I remember seeing my mom and dad, they get into a heated argument. I remember this as a kid, 7, 8 years old, before they eventually separated. And I remember seeing my dad, like, he'd ghost, like he'd take off in his car and go for a long drive to cool off. But, he would exit the confrontation
Mhm.
rather than resolve the confrontation. And that was modeled to me. So again, just a habit that later on in life, I just did it. Even with my wife, we get into a heated argument. I still catch myself every once in a while. I get heated, my emotions rise, and I just want to run.
Mhm.
I don't want to stay and face it. So it's recognizing a few of our current habits around relationships and tough conversations, vulnerability, right? Like, these are the pieces that it's just taking that self-assessment. And it's okay. I'm not saying you have to be great in all these areas. No, but being aware of how these areas all connect and maybe influence or impact some of our current relationships. And so taking that kind of an inventory, I think, is a great place to begin for people. Just getting clear, like, what are some of my non-negotiables when it comes to relationships? Trust, integrity, kindness. These are like non-negotiable values that my wife and I share. And when we meet new people, we're like, hey, do they align with us? And we have a basic question to sort of answer this. It's like, hey, can we envision ourselves hanging out on a beach with them, sharing a coconut? you know, like, can we see ourselves hanging out on the beaches of the world with these people, like these individuals I just met? And if we're like, hell yeah, it's like, we know that we're aligned,
Mhm.
and if not, it's okay. It's like, no, but this will be a nice connection. This is great. Like, we can be friends, but it's a different level, right? Which
Right.
also dictates how much energy we invest and put into it. Because again, before I went really wide, I didn't go deep.
Mhm.
Right? I went wide, collecting friends, collecting connections, but really just having a very surface level awareness of one another based on a lot of what I was doing. My inability to connect, go deep, and really have the conversation to discover about one another. And so those are a couple pieces. But first and foremost, I think we've already talked about, Jorge, was this idea of community, connection, and seeking a community that we can really plug into
Mhm.
to add value, but also receive value. And for myself, Toastmasters was one of those first organizations that I joined, which was amazing. If you're not aware, Toastmasters, global organization. It's a nonprofit. It's all volunteer driven, but it's people that come together to support each other to be more effective communicators and better leaders. And I was like, wow, what a crazy cool community. Because you go
Mhm.
to these places where, like, now they meet on Zoom based on the world, and it's just such a positive environment. I remember going to my very first meeting of this club that was local to me, and I was just like, wow, these people are all geared to personal and professional development, but supporting each other on their journeys for that.
Mhm.
And no judgment. It's all very positive, but also even the feedback you receive to improve is coming from a place of love, not a place of criticism. And it was awesome. It was my first time really being in an environment like that, which opened my eyes to, like, wow, if there's one group like this, there's got to be more groups like this out there. What else have I been sheltering myself from? And so baby steps, right? We just start exploring. And I think that is some of the basic tips I can offer. And when I say tips, like, I think we're all used to getting lots of tips. I mean, we read the top 10 blog posts here and top
Mhm.
10 episodes there. Great. You got to filter what's important to you and based on what you want. And if you're aware of that, if you want deeper connection, greater quality relationships, some of the things I just shared with you today have worked really well for myself and some of the people that I've worked with. So take what you want of it. Try one thing, try them all, whatever. But just start, right? Just start. Don't wait, and because I used to wait. I'm like, oh, someone will just reach out to me and maybe the opportunity will just happen where I'll have a deep connection with somebody. But until I proactively said, I want that, and I started to act accordingly and do things to put me in a place where I could have that experience, it wasn't going to happen. It just wasn't.
Right.
So that practical approach. So anyways, I go on and on, but take of that what you want.
No, I love that. Those are great reminders for people. You know, one quote that stood out to me when you were talking about relationships is, we take on the unfinished business of our parents. And that was super, that's become super clear to me because, like you said, what you watched when you were a kid, no matter what your parents could have lectured you 1,000 times on how to be a good person, how to have good relationships. But if they weren't modeling that, man, the modeling piece, the subconscious piece is by far the most important thing. And that's something that, unless you want to keep that negative relationship going in, you know, transgenerationally, because you're going to pass that behavior on to your kids, you got to break it, and you got to be the one to break it. And but first you have to recognize it.
Absolutely. Well said. Yeah, I agree with you 100%.
All right, man. I don't want to take up too much of your time. We've already gone an hour. I don't know how fast
It's
that passed
crazy, man.
by.
I know. Wild, wild.
So yeah, I'd like to finish it off with some quick questions at the end, some rapid fire rounds.
Let's do it.
So yeah. So number one, what is the most important habit you personally do every single day to support your mental or physical health?
Move my body with purpose. So that what I qualify that is, I'm moving my body with the intention of elevating my heart rate for positive adaptation. And what I mean by that is like, you have to put your body under a little bit of stress. Stress is actually a good thing. If you had zero stress in your life, well, I don't know if you'd ever get out of bed. Like, it's just what's the motivation, right?
Yeah.
So that's one habit that I've been consistent with. And even like I just had epigastric surgery. So it's basically, between your sternum and your belly button, the abdominal region there, I had a little tear, a little hernia, which I retore actually because I didn't recover fully last time. I got so impatient, I just went back to training. So I just had the surgery again. So I've been respecting no training based on the stress of my doctor. And I'm coming on 6.5 weeks now of not training, but I had to just pivot. So long walks every day. That's what I did. And I only bring that up as an example because when I say move your body with purpose, get a sweat on, a lot of people instinctively think I got to go to a gym. I gotta go do a class. Like there's the way we qualify and quantify what that is.
Yeah.
It's very limited, and I really want to broaden that up. So just move the body. So for me, like getting out for a long walk for an hour in the park, huge. Because it helps mental health, but it also helps with my physical health and spiritual health, to be honest. So yes, long answer to a short question. My apologies.
Awesome. No, I love that. That's something that is, walking is so underrated as part of movement, especially after meals and just keeping insulin, blood sugar stable. Oh man, like it's more powerful than some of the blood sugar medications out there. So that's awesome. All right, number two, what is the most important lesson you've learned recently?
Well, it's kind of a relearning of the lesson. About a year and a half ago, I did a Vipassana, a 10-day silent retreat. And it's non-secular, even though Vipassana is the style of meditation that was associated to Siddhartha's enlightening to become the Buddha. Okay. And it was believed that this is the meditation style. So I went and did this 10-day silent retreat. During that, I was reminded sort of by my interest in Buddhism. And I'm not here to say be a Buddhist or not, like that's not, I'm not a Buddhist. But I do admire a lot of what Buddha had to say. And I always was very fond of that idea of this too shall pass. This too shall pass. Because I always associated to, when I'm dealing with some struggles or something challenging, don't worry, Dai, you'll get through this. And there was something about that. We hear all the cliches, right? Like the metaphor is like, oh, don't worry, there's a light at the end of the tunnel. We're going to get there and it will all be good. But when we really think about that quote, this too shall pass, he was talking about all the great things in our lives as well. Like when my children were born, when I met my wife, the day we got married, the day I had a great conversation with an old friend. Like all these moments right now that we experience, they too will pass. The good things and the bad things. Either way, it becomes something that already happened. And so it's that awareness of what's happening when it's happening. And that's all I'm looking for more in my life is more awareness and appreciation and gratitude towards the experiences when they're happening. And so that's something that's really real for me right now that I'm actively trying to become much more in alignment with is this idea of just like, yeah, this too will pass, but these great things, man, they were great, and appreciating it while it's happening. So it's not just about the bad things; it's about the great things too.
Nice. Now, how can we, oh, actually, no, that's not it. What drives you to get up in the mornings on the days that you least want to?
I always pretend that getting out of bed in the morning's an Olympic event. So I pretend that I've got the IOC in my bedroom and the judges are there and they're going to grade me on how I get out of bed. My dismount's got to be golden, like literally gold performance. Because I realize it's the first action I'm going to take in the day. So I go for gold every morning, even if I'm feeling it or I'm not feeling it. It's like I'm just getting out of bed with a purpose. And the purpose is to get up and get my day started and just start living, because you just don't know. I may not be able to have a second performance tomorrow. You just don't know. And I'm not saying that I won't. I like to expect that I will, but we don't know. Yeah. So every morning it's just a gold performance. Am I going for gold or not? And it's setting the intention and then following it up with an immediate action. And I find by doing that, as silly as it sounds, it's sometimes those hyperbolized actions that we do that can make an instant shift to our biology, like instant. It's like if I ask you to close your eyes and imagine biting into a big, solid, sweet, juicy lemon, a lot of people, if they really imagine that, their lips start to pucker up, saliva starts to flow. Like we have this biological response. And I'm like, that's your mind influencing your body to have a response and to have an adaptation. Like it's all connected. So the way you do anything is the way you do everything, as the quote goes. And so that's sort of my intentionality around waking up in the morning, going for the gold.
That's awesome. I'm going to definitely be including that in my morning. Yeah, that's
awesome.
A good perspective, man. Yeah.
I love it. I love it.
So last question, what advice would you give your 20-year-old self?
You cocky little bastard. No, but seriously, I mean, from a place of love, but I think about who I was when I was 20 and I thought I knew it all. Like I thought I knew it all, and wasn't so willing to have people help because I wasn't willing to ask for help. Mm-hmm. And I think if I could go back and talk to myself, say like, listen, this shield of awareness, or drop the mask is what I would like to say. Don't pretend to be something that you're not. Just be you, and stop believing your own garbage. Because a lot of what I believed about myself wasn't founded in anything. It just wasn't. It was just a lot of make believe, especially as I start thinking about my psychology at the time and my belief on others, and like even just God. I won't go into deals. We could have a whole conversation, but that would be the bottom line. Would be just like, listen, get over yourself. You can have a lot more fun and have a lot more happiness in your life if you just stop pretending. That's what I would love to say. Really.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for coming on. Where can people find out more about you, your books, social media, etc.?
Oh, well, thank you. Easiest is probably my website, which is just my name.com. So daimanuel.com, DAIMANUEL.com. And the cool thing is Dai Manuel, yeah, it's a Welsh first name, means David. Last name's Portuguese. And as I say to everybody, Jorge, I'm Canadian. So there you go. Hence the mix. We're all mixes up here. And what I would love to say is just if you use my name on any social platform, especially Facebook or Instagram, that's where I'm most active. Just send me a message. Say, I heard you on Jorge's podcast. Oh, I loved what you guys are talking about. Here's what my favorite daily habit is that relates to my nutrition. I mean, just giving you an example, but just reach out. That's how conversations start, and I'm always keen to have the conversation. And I do always let people know that if you reach out to me, if I don't get back to you right away, don't worry, I will get back to you. That's my solemn swear. It's just that I do have, hey, like everybody else, I got a life, man. I limit my time on my phone and on my devices. So I will get back to you. It just may not be within 24, 48 hours kind of thing.
Awesome. All right, there we have it. Thank you very much for coming on the show.
Jorge, thank you. Keep spreading the good word, my man. And I'm looking forward to being a longtime listener. This has been just an enlightening conversation, as much as I felt it's been more of a lecture on my front. But I appreciate you taking it like someone drinking from a fire hose. I know when I get going, I'm like, but man, thank you for this opportunity. Truly honored and very proud to have had it. And I feel like we're going to be having more conversations later.